Lloyd Sturgis. This is December the 10th, 2014. We are here at the Margaret Walker Alexander Center at Jackson State University. What is your name, sir?
Leslie Burrell McLemore.
Do I have your permission to record this interview?
You do.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Dr. McLemore, how old are you?
74.
And where are you from, sir?
I am from Walls, Mississippi, DeSoto County. Born there August 17th, 1940.
What was it like growing up there?
Well, it was pain and pleasure. I grew up in small town of Walls, and my mother and my grandfather were the primary parents in my life. Grew up in this small town, which is really a farming community, surrounded by cotton fields or cornfields, and we lived in the town. But it was a normal childhood for, I guess, a black child in the 40s and 50s growing up in segregated Mississippi. And so I did the normal things that kids do. You know, I had fun shooting marbles, and I liked school, going to school, and doing all the things that normally you do. But it was a childhood that I cherish, and on reflection, you know, it wasn't really such a bad time at all. But on the other hand, you know, everything was segregated, and that was a way of life in Walls, Mississippi, in the 40s, in the 50s, and in the 60s. Yes.
Where do you live now, sir?
I live now actually in two places. I live here in Jackson, and I live in Walls, my hometown. So I'm spending time between DeSoto County and Hinds County.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. And what do you do for a living?
I am a retired university professor here at Jackson State on the faculty for nearly 40 years. And now I'm sort of doing what I want to do. I'm doing some writing and some reflecting, probably more reflecting than writing. But I am involved in 2 or 3 different community organizations. So between my involvement in the community organizations and in my writing and my reflections, it keeps me busy. So I have a full day every day of the week.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the writings. Are there any that you would like to talk about?
Well, I am actually putting together a book with 2 other colleagues, and we are putting together a book on Freedom Summer. So we are looking at the 1964 Summer Project, better known as Freedom Summer in Mississippi. And we are looking at documents that constituted the Freedom Summer, and we have developed a narrative. So it's going to be essentially a textbook. It's a narrative with primary documents, and we are examining all aspects of Freedom Summer. You know, Freedom Summer actually had 3 major components. One component was the Freedom Schools. The second component was voter registration, which really turned into sort of the organizing of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and then the development of community centers. So what we are doing, we are looking at the overall 1964 Summer Project, Freedom Summer, and then we are looking at primary documents in all 3 of these areas. So we are putting together that book that's going to be published at some point in 2015. So that is the primary writing project that I'm concentrating on. And then I'm doing some reflections on my memoirs, for the lack of a better term, and I'm doing more reflecting on that than writing, but that's something I'm also working on. So those are the sort of the two sort of writing projects that I'm involved in.
Yes, sir. You mentioned the Freedom Summer.
Yes.
How would you characterize your relationship within the civil rights movement?
Well, I got involved in the civil rights movement when I went off to college in 1960. I went to Rush College in Holly Springs, Mississippi. And I got involved in the campus movement at the time, and that morphed into the first college chapter on our campus of the NAACP. We formed back in 1962, and then I got involved in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and my involvement in SNCC primarily centered around voter registration, some direct action, but primarily voter registration in North Mississippi, and was involved in the Freedom Vote campaign in 1963. That was really the forerunner of the development of the Freedom Democratic Party, and was elected a delegate to the Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City in 1964, and was also, in fact, elected vice chair of the Freedom Democratic Party. So my involvement started 1960 through 64, while I was a student at Rust, involved with the NAACP and SNCC and COFO, and of course my eventual going to Atlantic City as a delegate.
Would you share with us which one of your earliest memories of the civil rights movement?
Well, I think the lynching of Emmett Till was my initial awareness of quote-unquote civil rights as an issue. Then, of course, the first major movement activity for me was the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott. Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and E.D. Nixon and all of those people. So the Montgomery bus boycott, I think, captured the imagination of the country. I mean, Emmett Till occurs, his killing, his lynching occurs within that same time frame, and you may recall that Rosa Parks pointed out the day that she didn't give up her seat on that bus, she said one of the things that she was thinking about is what had happened to Emmett Till in Mississippi. So the Emmett Till lynching, the Montgomery bus boycott, because that was direct action in such a way that it brought to the fore the civil rights movement. And then the pivotal role, of course, that television played in 1955 and the impact that it had in terms of bringing the civil rights movement really right to your living room in terms of activity. So early memories centered around the Till killing, his lynching, and then the oncoming of the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, and the emergence, obviously, of Martin Luther King as a national leader. Yes.
How did these events affect you personally?
Well, Emmett Till had a profound impact on me because I was actually 1 year older than Emmett Till when he was lynched, and it affected me from the standpoint of living in Mississippi, knowing what could happen to you if you got quote unquote out of line. It heightened my awareness of what was going on in Mississippi. It motivated me to read a bit more about U.S. history and Mississippi history. Obviously, it entailed a lot of conversations between me and my parents about, what could happen to a young black kid in Walls, Mississippi, because this happened in Money, Mississippi. So it had a profound effect on me. And then, of course, the emergence of Martin Luther King as the leader of the Montgomery bus boycott. And Dr. King's leadership, his oratory, his presence had a profound effect on me. And again, it caused me to read, it caused me to think about, I'm 15 years old, thinking about what should be happening in my community, what could happen in my community. And I grew up just down the highway from Memphis, Tennessee. So that's a large city where they had an active NAACP chapter in Memphis. And so demonstrations and sit-ins started in Memphis. And this is just really within a half hour from where I lived. So all of these things, I mean, the gravity of what was happening in Alabama, of course the Till killing, I thought very deeply about these things and was very much concerned about them. And what that did for me, it began to awaken me really about the possibilities. What are the possibilities for a black child living in Mississippi at that time? What are the limits? What are the possibilities? And I think the civil rights movement caused me to really think about those possibilities of what it actually meant to be a citizen in Mississippi in the 1950s and moving forward.
Could you recall for us what was the racial climate like in Walls, Mississippi?
Well, it was a small, segregated town. My contact with white folk were in the grocery store or the stores. There was a segregated movie theater in the town. There were actually just benches on both sides of a building. On one side were white folks, and the other side were black folk. I mean, it was personal segregation. We had at one point we had 2 movie theaters. I'm being kind and calling them theaters, but they were movie houses in the town, and they were the segregated facilities that we had. My town, we didn't have any public accommodations. We didn't have any restaurants. There were places where black folk and white folk would gather ordinarily. This was just a very small place, but black folk, we knew our place. This was a plantation community, a plantation town. The town was controlled by 2 or 3 different plantation owners. It was unincorporated, so there was not a mayor. There were not city fathers or mothers, anything like that. But we existed within the confines of this segregated a community. So I knew my neighbors. My grandfather's next door neighbors were white folk who ran a dairy farm. My grandfather ran a restaurant, a juke joint that opened on the weekends, and I didn't think really much about where we lived, because it was just the way we owned our little plot of land in the town. We owned our home, and we existed. The outlet for us was going to Memphis, which again was a segregated community. So when we went to the theater in Memphis. It was a black theater, white owned, but a black theater, black theaters. And going downtown Memphis, the stores were open to everybody, you know, but it was clearly segregated. You knew the lines of demarcation, and that was something that was an integral part of growing up in this little small town. So when I say the segregation was very personal, it was very personal because, you know, we knew Mr. Freeman, who ran the commissary. We knew Mr. Stamps, who owned the other commissary, you know. So it was personal segregation. And, you know, we lived that existence. And I had the great pleasure, in one sense, of growing up in a family where we own our own land, own our own home, you know, and that was not the norm in the little town that I grew up in.
Between the walls and Memphis, were there any incidents that stood out in your memory?
Not really. Once in my hometown, and I can't remember what caused this, but I remember the movie theater, one of the movie house owners whipping a young black boy. And I can't remember exactly what he was accused of doing, but that caused some commotion in the community. I know my grandfather and my mother and some of the elders were upset around that beating, but other than that, I can't remember, because, you know, we didn't have anything at that point to try to integrate. I'm thinking now about the 40s and the 50s, leading up to the 60s. But that was the only incident that I can think of, and I can't think of any one particular incident in Memphis, except, you know, when they started. This is later in the early 60s when they started the sit-ins, you know, at the lunch counters in Memphis. You know, I mean, that was clearly a part of what was going on nationally. But in my hometown, we didn't have any drugstores or any facilities, you know, to integrate, because, you know, they were not there. But the incident involving the beating of you know, one of my friends is the only thing that I can recall that stands out now in my mind.
Would you characterize that incident as a trigger that motivated you to become active in the movement?
No, I really think Emmett Till's death probably was a wake-up call for me in the Montgomery bus boycott, and then the early sit-ins in Tulsa, in Kansas, that really predated Greensboro, when I became sort of aware of what was happening in the country. And I graduated from high school in 1960. So between 56 and 60 was really a coming of age in one sense, because here I am aware of what was going on in Montgomery, was aware of what was going on up the highway from me in Memphis, and was reading and having discussions with my parents and neighbors and school friends about what was happening in the country, and was very active in student affairs in high school. I was president of my freshman class, my sophomore class, my junior class, and my senior year I was president of student government. And we went to a new school my senior year in my hometown, and I led a boycott of classes as student council president at my high school, because the principal had assigned several teachers to serve as advisors of the student council. And of course he appointed several teachers in order to try to control our activities, because This was 1959-60 school year. You had sit-ins and stuff going on. You had demonstrations going. You had all the beginning of the civil rights activities. So the principal said, in order to make sure nothing happens at this school, and now we're in this town where we had nothing to integrate because there were no drugstores to lunch counters to integrate, but he wanted to try to control our activities. So we protested the fact that 4 teachers on the student council was too much. And then this was a new school, but we had no, what we described then, no Negro history books in the library. So we boycotted classes because of that. And then the third reason we boycotted classes was because of the food in the cafeteria. We didn't like the food. So I had that experience my senior year in high school. So going off to Russ College in Holly Springs really provided me a broader canvas to become much more active. But those were important years in my life. And going to college, being away from home, although not but 50 miles, but being away from home on my own and being independent was just an amazing time. And so I was in college between 1960 and 1964. So the height of the civil rights movement occurred during that period of time, of the modern civil rights movement. And so it was, you know, on reflection, obviously it was one of the greatest periods of my life, being independent, off in college, and meeting new friends and getting involved in activities that I had never dreamed of, and going to places and cities and towns and stuff that I'd never had been to before. So it was an important period.
Can you give us more detail about your college years and graduate school as well?
Well, I went off to college, as I pointed out, in 1960. And again, I repeated the pattern that I had done in high school. I was elected my freshman class president. So I was in a leadership position. In the very first semester on the campus at Rust, the leadership on the campus, student leadership, boycotted the local theater, movie theater, which was actually a movie theater in Holly Springs. It was segregated. Blacks sat upstairs in the balcony, and of course whites were on the floor of the theater. And we called a boycott of the theater, and we stopped going to that. So I got involved in that boycott, which was sort of a form of direct action. You know, we sort of marched on the theater and that kind of stuff. And eventually it was integrated, but it took a while. But we stopped going. We boycotted it. And then I got involved with voter registration. And we formed what we call a Speakers Bureau. And the Speakers Bureau, of course, was designed to go from town to town in Marshall County, in Benton County, in North Mississippi, to talk to people about registering, to talk to people about voting. We conducted voter registration workshops, teaching people how to fill out the form, because there were these questions that you had to respond to, something called a literacy test that was part of the registration process. So I got involved in voter registration, got involved in the Speakers Bureau. And then my sophomore year, when we formed the college chapter of the NAACP, I was elected president of the college chapter of the NAACP. And out of that, we primarily worked in Holly Springs, Marshall County, neighboring county of Benton County. And we did some work in Tate County and some work in my home county of DeSoto. But we did voter registrations, we did public forums, we worked closely with the community leadership, especially there in Holly Springs. And then I started to attend NAACP state meetings and went to some regional conferences of the NAACP. And during that same period of time in '62, got involved with the SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that had come to Mississippi in 1961 when they started the Macomb Project in Macomb, Mississippi. And that's when I met Bob Moses, who was the leader of SNCC in Mississippi, and again got involved in voter registration and other activities here in Jackson and other places in Mississippi. And then got really very much involved in 1962 with the campaign of Reverend Merrill Winston Lindsay, who ran for the U.S. Congress from the reconstituted 2nd Congressional District. And Reverend Lindsay was the college chaplain and a professor of religion at Rush College. So he ran for the U.S. Congress. And his brother-in-law, Aaron Henry, was his campaign manager. So I got involved in that real-life political campaign in 1962 when Reverend Lindsay ran for the U.S. Congress. And out of that '62 campaign, because there was a campaign in this district, Reverend Ariel T. Smith ran for the U.S. Congress. So out of the '62 campaigns that were sort of orchestrated by Bob Moses, this was the first time that blacks had run for the U.S. Congress since Reconstruction. As you well know, John Roy Lynch served in the Congress from Mississippi and from this district. But Lindsay and Smith ran for the U.S. Congress. And out of that congressional campaign, the Freedom Vote campaign was developed, and that was 1963. And I was very much involved in the Freedom Vote campaign. Aaron Henry ran for governor. Reverend Ed King ran for lieutenant governor. And of course, this was a mock election. This was an imitation election, but it paralleled the regular statewide election in Mississippi in 1963. And so over about 3 days, there was voting in November of 1963. Again, Aaron Henry and Ed King garnered over 80,000 votes of people voting in this Freedom Vote campaign. And the campaign was conducted because the basic notion was that black folk didn't want to vote, didn't want to participate. And so the Freedom Vote campaign was held to demonstrate to everybody in Mississippi, the good white folks here, and across the country, that given the opportunity, that black folk would register and they would vote, because more than 80,000 people voted in this mock election. So, of course, the Freedom Vote campaign laid the foundation for part of Freedom Summer, and it laid the foundation for the development of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And of course, the Freedom Party was formed here in Jackson in April of 1964. I was one of the founders of the Freedom Democratic Party. I was one of the members of the temporary executive committee of the Freedom Democratic Party, and of course became a member of the permanent executive committee, and was elected vice chair at the tender age of 23 at the time of the Freedom Democratic Party. So again, I went to Atlantic City as a delegate in 1964 and was a part of the settlement and the compromise that was offered to the Freedom Democrats by the National Democratic Party in 1964. So that sort of summarizes my civil rights activities from 1960 through 1964, culminating with my involvement in Atlantic City. And after Atlantic City, I went off to graduate school at Atlanta University and got a master's in political science, and taught for a year at Southern University in Baton Rouge, and then went back to graduate school at the University of Massachusetts, where I got a doctorate in government, political science there, and I got my doctorate back in 1971. Yeah.
You mentioned Atlantic City.
Yeah.
What was the climate like in Atlantic City?
Exciting, absolutely exciting because this was the National Democratic Party convention. So you had representatives from all of the states in the Union. And we were there, the Freedom Democrats were there, because we were challenging the regular lily-white segregated delegation in Mississippi. So we had conducted parallel elections in Mississippi, parallel meaning they mirrored the process that the regular segregated party had used to elect delegates. So being in Atlantic City, working for the Freedom Democratic Party, trying to get our party seated, it was really exciting. And meeting people from all over the country, conversing with folk, and lobbying and caucusing and doing all the things that you must do in order to try to win seats for your delegation. It was exciting. It was exciting. It was a learning experience. Saw Duke Ellington for the first time in my life. So it was a great experience. And prior to Atlantic City, in the summer of '64, I had worked in the national office of the Freedom Democratic Party in Washington, D.C. So I spent most of the summer of 1964 working with Ella Baker in Washington, D.C., and we were the lobbying arm of the Freedom Democratic Party. So I had done some groundwork, advanced work in Atlantic City before I went to Atlantic City as a delegate. So I was both a delegate, but in June and July and part of August of '64, I was working between Washington, D.C. and Atlantic City, New Jersey. And so we were part of sort of the advanced team laying the foundation for the coming of the Freedom Democratic Party in August of 1964. So this was really a period for me that was really exciting. I really enjoyed it, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, sir. You mentioned Ella Baker.
Yes.
What was Miss Baker like?
Miss Baker was a fountain of knowledge, a quiet leader, a person who knew how to get the job done, was a person that cared deeply about humankind and really wanted to see this country live up to its creed, and of course devoted her life and her energy to try to change America. So working with her was a grand experience, something that I will cherish all of my life.
Was there any particular thing, sir, that you carried away from that experience, that time you spent working with Mrs. Baker?
Yes. The idea that your principles are so important and that you should never ever compromise your principles. This woman had fought for equal rights and social justice from a very early age when she was a student at Shaw University. And as one of the forerunners of members of the NAACP working on developing branches throughout the South, and later working for Martin Luther King in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I mean, she stood fast around the principles that guided her life, and social justice was at the heart and soul of what she was about and what she tried to do. So I cherish those memories of working with Miss Baker, listening to her, learning from her. She was clearly an awesome leader and a quiet leader, that influenced so much of the leadership later that became, you know, the forerunners in the civil rights movement.
How would you define social justice?
Social justice is the process of people living up to the principles identified in the Constitution and the principles identified in the Bill of Rights and those human rights that all of us are entitled to as human beings: fairness, justice, and equality, and bringing about a sense of equity. And social justice is dedicated to the proposition that equity should prevail in every aspect of our lives.
Do you think, sir, that our focus on social justice has changed from the civil rights movement until now?
I think the meaning in totality of social justice has expanded. Clearly, if you look at what is happening around gender issues and sexual issues in this country, I mean, there's an expansion of what we identified as social justice in the 50s and 60s. But the idea of equity, equality, you know, these are old age things that will not change. I mean, just think about it in terms of what does it mean to be a first-class citizen, the importance of citizenship, and how we all are entitled to citizenship. So the whole issue around immigration now, issues that we did not tackle in the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, but that's all a part of the social justice agenda in 2014.
How would you like young people to remember and understand the civil rights movement?
Well, for all of us, young people, older people, to understand that the civil rights movement is a constant struggle, that the struggle for equality and greater participation is an ongoing struggle. And so democracy is an ongoing project. Democracy is a never-ending project. You cannot place a period behind democracy. It's always a comma, because you are moving every day. You are trying to live up to the goals identified in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution. So I would want young people to understand that this is an ongoing struggle, that each generation has the obligation to define for themselves what it means to be a citizen in this country or a citizen of the world. And so it's an ongoing challenge, but also it's, of course, it's an ongoing opportunity too. And that's something that young people should grasp and must grasp, because it's a fight that is an everyday fight. I mean, you don't give up the fight because you have achieved a certain status in life. You have to continue that struggle. So the struggle continues.
With your experiences all over the nation and the world, what made you decide to return to Mississippi after you received your PhD?
Well, I had been indoctrinated by the Mississippi environment. It must have been the water, it must have been, I don't know, something. But I call it Mississippi nationalism. I just felt being in the civil rights movement, coming to college in 1960, the experience changed me. I went to college with the idea that I wanted to be a medical doctor, and got involved in the movement and changed my mind. I mean, it sort of reordered the priorities in my life. And given that Mississippi had the reputation that it earned as being one of the most oppressive places in the country, I just saw my goal was to come back and to try to change Mississippi. So I came back, and I've stayed because I think Mississippi has this great potential. And if you don't fight for something that you love, then you don't love it. And so there's this love-hate relationship that I've had with Mississippi all of my life. And I've decided that this is where I'm going to place my stakes, and I've placed my stakes, and I'm still here. But I was brought back by my sense of loyalty to Mississippi, a place that I love and a place that I want to change, that I want to see thrive and do better. And so in Mississippi, there's work to be done every day. So you don't have to worry about, well, what is my assignment today? There's something to be done in Mississippi every day. Yes.
Speaking of there being work to do in Mississippi every day.
Yes.
How do you feel about the progress that has been made?
I am absolutely pleased, on the one hand, that we have made remarkable progress. And I just hate to hear people say that we have not progressed. There has not been any progress, and there has been. Because I remember the Mississippi of my youth, in my childhood, and I know Mississippi today. But also, I'm fully aware enough, the older I get, the more I realize how little I know. And I realize that the struggle continues, that there's a lot of work to be done. We have made tremendous progress, but then there's so much work to be done in the future. So we cannot rest on our laurels. Yes, we've made progress, and I'm proud of the progress that we've made. But also, I'm disappointed that we have not made any more progress. And then, if you're disappointed, you have to do your part to try to make sure that you can move to another level. And we have too much poverty. We have too much illiteracy. All of these things that we must attack, that we must deal with. And that's the challenge that we face. And of course, again, that's an opportunity that we have as citizens to try to bring about this fundamental change in our state.
How would Dr. McLemore address these challenges?
Education. And I mean pre-K education, pre-K through graduate school. I spent the bulk of my adult life in education on this campus. And education is the key. I am the son of a Mississippi-born sharecropper. First in my family to graduate high school, college, graduate school, the whole bit. And I know what education has done for me, and I know what it can do for us individually and collectively. So we have to expose our young people early on to education, to the educational system, and we must work hard every day to ensure that young people are getting and obtaining a quality education.
What do you see as some of the barriers now to young people receiving a quality education?
Well, I think it centers around the preparedness of the teachers, It centers around the preparedness of the family, the parents. You know, it really centers around the fact that we have to embrace education. I mean, as a community, as a family, as a state, and as a nation. And then we have to realize that education is too important to be left to just quote unquote the educators. So this is an obligation that we all have, and we have to get parents and much more involved in the lives of their own students, of their own children, and then we have to get institutions involved in improving the quality of education. So there is an obligation, a total obligation on all of our part to take a much more active role in developing the education of children, because that is the very foundation of our community and of our country. And that's why I said that I think pre-K through graduate school is important, because we have to educate the whole person.
What advice would you give to young people who want to have some impact on their community? Study hard, get to know your community, have a good profile of where you live, and have a clear understanding of what the issues are. But it is important that we study and that we learn what ought to be done, and that we listen to the voices in our community as we attempt to try to change and bring about the quality of life that we all desire. But studying is so fundamental to really knowing about your community and having a foundation and a framework for beginning to change your community. In discussing community, what do you remember about some of the communities that you worked in during the Civil Rights Movement?
Number one, I discovered immediately that in so many of these communities, when we go into communities and say, well, we're going to develop leadership, or we're going to do this and that and the other, so often the leaders are already there. You know, and when SNCC and the new civil rights organizations came to Mississippi, they soon discovered that when they went to Macomb or they went to the Delta, that the leaders were already there. Is that the leaders needed people to work with them. You know, it was not about them coming to town developing leaders. And so one of the things that I discovered early on too is that the best and the most effective way to get something done is to work in coalition and cooperation with people in the community, because you don't really have to reinvent the wheel. The wheel has been invented.